So hopefully, barring technical problems, things will be recorded, and let's start with, does anybody have any questions? Okay, oh, who was somebody about to say something? Maybe not. I'm still trying to figure out what we're going to do about labs. They have said they're not sure, but they think what they're going to do is not next week. I'm not even allowed on campus next week. Wasn't allowed this week. They're going to probably allow some of the labs to be done, students to come in and do labs, but they're going to limit the number of students that can be in the room at once. And so we'll set times. I know some of you are primarily more day students, so if that happens, I'll just work around your all schedules on when you can come in and work on labs. Charles, and those of you that have to be nights, I'll meet with you on the Thursday nights. If that doesn't happen, and hopefully I'll find out more tomorrow because we have a department meeting tomorrow, and it's going to be through Zoom just like this. Hopefully what's going to happen, if that doesn't happen, I'm just going to do labs where you're going to just do the design work, and I'll give you a scenario and you're just going to tell me how you would design it and things. We still, I think with this group, you'll still understand everything you need to know. This is a learning experience for all of us. I don't think any of us expected this, so that's what I'm planning right now. And after the meeting tomorrow, if we're going to be able to get back on campus to do some things, I'll let everybody know. If you have a machine and can do all the labs from home, then by all means, you won't have to come in. As far as the project, you would really need a really powerful machine to do. So that one is more than likely just going to be a design document instead of actually doing the implementation. Usually I have you design it, then do the implementation. More than likely, just that's going to be a design document, and that is what you'll do for your final exam. There is no question and answer final in this class. That project is essentially the final exam. Any questions there? Just a couple of things I want to talk about. I'm going to have some more videos out. Hopefully, get them out over the weekend. We've got, if you've looked at some of those, a couple of them are dated. They were done with server 2016, but nothing's really changed in that. So what I've got, some that as soon as I get them edited, get all my uhs and some of that stuff out, and my coughs and such, I'm going to post those, and I've got those on groups and group policy. And those are the two big things we haven't done. If you think about it, and let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. I'm still trying to figure out a little bit on how to click on whatever to share everything and all. We've done the organizational units, and we saw that we could create these OUs, and we could divide the users and computers up, say maybe by department, location, function. We've done that. We've not talked about how we divide users into groups, and that maybe should have been done earlier on, but I wanted us to get our infrastructure built, which luckily we got most of that infrastructure and got those servers. Maybe it was just dumb luck on my part that I did it that way. But once you've got your users, then you need to divide them up into groups. And where a user or a computer can only be in one organizational unit, it can be in as many groups as you need. So I can have hundreds of groups. And the way I typically look at it is I do groups based on what you need to do. So I may have a general group. That general group would give people permissions to access maybe Microsoft Office, things that everybody pretty much needs to do. So I've got that general group. And then I would have maybe an accounting group. I'd have maybe a engineering group. And some of those groups will actually match the organizational unit. But I would have a managers group or one or more management. Groups are where you give users permissions. Groups are where you give users permissions. And there are three types of groups. There are the universal, global, and domain local. Now, a group can be inside of a group. Microsoft has a suggestion of how you do groups, and they say that you do not put users in a domain local group. What you put in a domain local group are you set permissions. Permissions to use printers, permissions to use folders, programs, files, things like that. You put your users either in a global or universal group. In a small organization, you may not have any universal groups, so just put all your users in a global. The reality is, I would combine those two groups if I was doing it now, and I think Microsoft would, but the global group is for compatibility, or was originally for compatibility with the old Windows NT groups. And you can look up the differences in those groups. Essentially, for example, any user from any domain can be a member of a domain local group. But a global group, you have to be a member of the domain that global group is in. But you can have permissions in another domain. And a universal group, you can be in any domain and be a member of. Groups can also be members of other groups. So I can have a, say, a printers group that gives you permission to print, and in it, I could have the, let's say, office users group. So anybody that is an office user is a member of the printers group, so they can access the printers. If it was the other way around, if the printers group was inside the officers group, it would say that the printers could do anything the officers could do. And once you set your groups up, then you set the permissions. And I'm going to find a folder here. And you can set permissions based on folders, or in other words, you can have a folder has permissions. You can also set permissions on individual files. Don't. It is rare that you have to set permissions on an individual file. If I right click and go to properties, and I know this is going to be real tough for you guys to see, under the couple of things, under the security tab are permissions. And I could pick different users and see what permissions they may have. And I could edit these permissions and I could change them, or I could add a user. So if I come in and add a user, there's only one user on this system, that's me. By default, it says I've got read and execute, list folder contents, read and write. I'm sorry, I don't have write. So as my user, I can read the files, I can list the contents of the folder, but I can't write to it. If I give myself write permissions, then I could write to it. But with the write permissions, I can't change it. Once it's created, I can just create it. But if I've got modify permissions, then I could go back and change it. If I take away the write permission, it automatically takes away the modify, because if you can't write to the file, you can't modify it. And so you can assign users or groups permissions. Rarely should you ever assign permissions to an individual user. That would be a very special case. What you would do is assign these permissions to a group, and that group can do then what those permissions say. If you give them full control, they can do anything. So be careful who you give full control. Allow says they can access that, in this case, folder. If you have a deny, it overrides all the allows. So when I deny modify, it basically denied pretty much everything. If I allow modify, it allows it. Now you can be members of more than one group. Since you can be members of more than one group, the way you figure your permissions on a file or folder is you add up the permissions, the allow permissions on every group you're a member of. That gives you your effective or overall permission. So if one group has just read and execute, but another group has modify, you have both. The exception of that is if there's a deny. If somebody's checked the deny, you can be a member of 100 groups that are allowed, but you're still denied. So a deny overrides any allow. So be careful with deny. There's been very, very few cases where I've had to go in and check that deny box. Usually that's one for an individual user, and usually he keeps doing something stupid, deleting files or things that he shouldn't be doing, and then I deny their permissions. But be very careful there. If you don't have either allow or deny checked, you're denied for that group, but you're not denied if you have the allow on somebody else's, because they're cumulative. If it's not checked, it's an implied deny. If it's checked, it's an explicit either allow or deny, and it overrides that. So you want to create that domain local group and set the permissions in. So you've got your domain local, and this is where you set your permissions. And then you have all these other groups, say accounting, and you make them a member of domain local, and then they have all the access permissions domain local has. Maybe you also give that to engineering. So they would have all those, and every user that's a member of that group would have all those permissions. So you set permissions in those domain local. You set permissions in the domain local, and then you put your regular groups there. So you don't put users. There may be an exception. There may be a time that a user that's not a member of one of those groups that have that permission needs to. Then you could put that user in, but be careful of that. Most of the time, if you've designed your groups properly, you're in good shape. Any questions there? All right. Once you've got your groups created, your users in groups, then you're ready to do the next thing, and that is group policy or set up policies. I do not like the name group policy because group policies don't apply to groups. They apply to organizational units. A group policy applies to an organizational unit. But I can use groups to filter out and have it not apply to certain users and all. So it's kind of backwards. I wouldn't have called it group policy. When you go into your network group policy and create one, there are, depending on the version of server that you're using and what services are installed. So when you install Active Directory on a domain controller, there are policies that only apply to it. If you are running a SQL server, there are policies for it. If you're running Outlook, there are policies for it. But there are somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 things you can set in policy. You'll have all those memorized by next week, I'm sure. Now, actually, 95% of them or more, you'll never use, you'll never change. There's no need to. Now, you can do local. When it comes to group policy, group policies follow that organizational unit structure. Let me go back here. And we had our domain. Actually, we had our forest, but let's just look at the domain. And you've got domain policies. You have site policies. And then you have OU policies. And you have local computer policies. When the computer boots up, any local computer policies are applied on the computer side. When a user logs in, any user policies are for the local. Stay away from those because local policies have to be done on every individual machine. So you I kind of look and say, those don't even exist. When the computer boots up, the first policies that are applied are actually the site policy. We talked about sites already. We do the site policy because the computers are on different locations and there may be something needs to be applied from that location. Then it will do the domain policies. And when you installed Active Directory, remember that then required those complex passwords. Well, the default domain policy that Active Directory does is where those came from. Password policies are part of the group policy, and at the domain level, that 42-day change, that complex password is part of it. It can be overridden even. Then after it does the domain policies, then it'll do the OU policies. And if you've got OUs inside of OUs, it works its way down that hierarchy. If there are more than one policy for a particular organizational unit, it applies those in the order you tell it. So you can control the order that it applies those policies. Questions there?
I hear crickets.
Oh, huh? I
said I hear crickets.
You hear crickets. Yep. What happens, question, what happens if two policies conflict with each other. Let's say you've got policy 1 that says change password every 90 days, and policy 2 that says change it password every 120 days. Which policy is applied, or wins, I should say?
Whichever policy was applied the latest.
Exactly. If you've got conflicting policies, the last one wins. So if this is the domain policy of 90 days, and this is an OU policy of 120, 120 wins. So it's always whatever the last one for a particular item is that wins. Now, if I am the domain administrator, I want my 90-day policy to win all the time. So you can set an item in a policy that's called no override. And the no override says, I don't care what these next policies say, you do not let those win. You do not let those win. All right. I'm going to just show you a few things from the local security policy. The domain, and on a server, you're just going to have more. And the screen, okay, I don't have permission to do that. Let's try it again. Well, now it let me in, so it may let me look. No, I am not logged in as administrator, so let me see if I can run it as administrator. Namespace, sensors. Didn't like something. Okay. If I look at my local security policy, it does look a little different from what you're going to see, but it's got a lot of the same things. It's got my account policies, local, so the organization's a little bit different, but I've got here, say, a password policy, and I know this is not really readable, but it says enforce password history, 0 passwords remembered. That means I can change my password to the same password I have. If I double click on it, I can go in and say, okay, don't keep the history or leave it, keep the 3 passwords. And so I can't use the same password over again until I've had 3 different passwords before it. If I look, for example, the maximum age, it's 42 days. Now, the domain one's going to give you a little more information and things if it's assigned, applied. In my case, it's not applied. And if I look, where's my all? I know where the all is in the domain one. Okay. Well, here is just a few more. And you can see just in the security options, there are a bunch of them. Now, some of them say not defined. If they're not defined, that means they're ignored. Not defined is ignored. Disabled says, well, they're turned off, and enabled say they're turned on. So you can turn on and off these policies as you need. The domain one is divided into 2 groupings. There's a computer group and a user group of policies. And some of those are different depending on whether it's a user or a computer. On the domain level, the computer policy is applied when the computer boots up, user policy when the user logs in. So you've got the computer, user, There are things that are part of the computer policy that aren't in the user and vice versa, but there's some settings that are in both. That would override the computer settings if the user has it set. How many policies can you have? I don't know. There's probably a maximum number somewhere. I would say that it fits in that in Active Directory, you can have 4 billion total objects. That's users, computers, groups, organizational units, and policy. And I think policies fit in there. So as long as the sum of that doesn't exceed that 4 billion, and if it does, I don't want to manage your network. What you want to do when you're creating the policies is look at one type of, let's say, event. So if I create a policy that I'm going to set passwords and set logins, I would not set anything about the start menu in that policy. So if I've got a password policy, I'm not going to set anything about the start menu in the password policy. If I've got a start menu policy, I'm not going to set anything about the password. Keep each of these policies simple. Don't do too much in one. Keep them to one topic, the password topic, the start menu topic. If you have too many things in it, and then you have to modify for certain users or remove all the password information for a group, for an organizational unit, you'd have to go in and individually change those. If your password one is just dealing with passwords, you end up with, okay, I can just modify that part, disable it, and I don't have to worry about anything else. So a lot of policies, now, I don't know how many's a lot, depends on the size network, but a lot of policies just changing one thing or another and name them something that makes sense. In the videos I'll have out, it will show you some namings of those policies and things. Now, there's another thing that we'll talk about. The last thing I'm going to talk about group policies here, unless there are questions, is you can, if you set up right and you have programs that can be installed this way, you can control installing and updating software through group policy. You can do one of two things. You can assign or publish. We've all downloaded software that are exe files. We've downloaded software that are MSI files. An MSI file can be published. An exe file can be assigned. And the difference comes into how they actually get installed. When you publish a file, it will, when the machine boots up and reads that group policy that says to publish that file, it will automatically install it and create the icons and everything. Or depending on how you configure it, the icon will show up, and when the user clicks on that icon, then it will install the program. If you assign a program, they'll have to go into their add remove programs, but it will then install it over the network. So you don't have to go around to individual machines and install it. You can just have that user go to their add remove programs and click on that one, and it will install it there. With the publish, depending on how you configure it, it will either automatically install it, or as soon as they click on the icon that it puts in, it'll install it there. When you publish, You can also update that software. You can't easily update the software with a sign. When you publish it, if there's an update, you can have an MST instead of MSI file, and that is a transform file, and that will just do the update. You can also, on publishing, you can uninstall. So you can do that as well. And I will try to go through and do a video. I've not done a video on that I need to edit yet, but I'll try and do a video on that as well. So that's basically your quickie version of group policies and all. Okay, so any questions there? I know before spring break was a long time ago, but if you've got anything you had questions about then as well. All right. I'm going to ask if anybody wants to volunteer. You don't have to, but if anybody would like to, and I do not have a date on this yet. Our church is doing some remodeling of the sanctuary, and we need somebody that's willing to get red clay all over them, crawl under the sanctuary to help the electrician move cables and things. We'll actually pay you a little bit. I said about $10 an hour. And depending on what they decide, this could be as short as running a few Cat 6 cables, or as long as helping the electrician and the sound guy, sound installer, fish sound cables. You don't have to tell me today and all, but if any of you would like to help with that when it happens, hopefully it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Let me know, and as I say, we'll pay you a little bit. Not going to pay a whole lot, but we'll pay you a little bit, and I'll give extra credit. But this group, I don't think anybody's going to need extra credit. What we're doing is we're redoing our stage on our sanctuary, so we're going to have to replace the sound connections, the audio connections underneath, but we're also going to, while we're at it, run some Cat 6 cable so that when we upgrade our sound system in a couple of years, that cable will already be in place to go digital. So again, if anybody's interested in it, feel free to just email me through DT2L and let me know, and we'll be happy to do that. Probably send out for pizza. I'd say we'd take you out afterwards, but you can't go out to eat anywhere anymore. Right. Any last questions? If you don't have any, we'll probably do this again next Thursday if we've got questions and things, and I'll try to get those videos done over the weekend and get them posted that on the group policy and go through the steps there. All right, Joni, if you'd hang on after everybody goes away, I got a couple of student worker questions for you.
Okie dokie.
All right, everybody else, we will see you later.
I do have one question really quick.
Okay.
There's some labs out there that are now past due, and I'm pretty sure you already addressed that.
Yeah, don't worry about those until we can get back into class, and if we don't get back into the classroom, we won't worry about them at all.
Okay, what's the possibility of us downloading VirtualBox for this class?
If you can download VirtualBox and you can, or VMware, and you can download if you don't have the ISO, you can download, if you Google, get a 90 or 180 day version of Server 2019, and you could do them from home. So if you have the capability of doing from home, either with VirtualBox or with VMware, you're more than welcome to do them from home.
I got VirtualBox installed today for Windows 10.
Yeah.
For desktop OS, and I also did a machine for Kali.
Yeah. So yeah, you could do the server ones.
I noticed that that just adding the software that I added today slowed my machine down quite a bit.
When, while the virtual machines are running, it will. If you shut, it should go back to normal speed when there's no virtual machines running.
Okay.
I hope it does. It better. Make sure you shut down the virtual machines and then close VirtualBox. Otherwise, it runs in the background.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did that there earlier, and I can tell a little bit of difference now. Seems like it's running better.
Okay. Yeah. That's one of the problems with virtualization is it does slow your machines down.
Yeah.
I'd also suggest going through your apps. Anything that's unnecessary, turn off the background noise.
Yep.
All right. That should be about everything that I had.
Okay.
All right. Have a good evening.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.